Good morning. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming. This is my first time in the States, first time in San Francisco or the San Francisco area. I'm trying to be clear about which place is which. Yeah. And yeah, I'm so happy to be here, so excited, and I've just been so welcomed. I think that's the first thing I need to say. Everybody has been so kind since I got here. This is my third day in America, and I had so many different ideas of what it was going to be like, what the people would be like, the culture, the food, and I can safely say WCN is the nicest, maybe second to wildlife crime prevention because I'm biased that way, but they are the nicest group of people. So if for no other reason, give them your money. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I'll start by giving a bit of introduction, who I am, why I'm here, and how I got into conservation. As Hefe mentioned, I was born in Zambia, but when I was 2 years old, my parents moved to Botswana. So I spent most of my life living in a village called Maun, which, as Hefe also mentioned, is right on the edge of the Okavango Delta. So wildlife has always been my life. And I look back on it now and I didn't see it. When you're growing up, you don't think about how your childhood is impacting who you're going to become when you're older. But I was always in the wildlife club. My parents are both nomads. They love to travel. So weekends were getting in the bakkie. A bakkie is like, I think you call it a truck here? Yeah, getting in the truck and just driving around aimlessly in the national park. The cool thing about Botswana is the wildlife is so integrated and it's so easy to get access to it. So you didn't even have to go into the national park to see it. And it's sad to see that that's changing. And when I later went to high school, I was in the science club and the conservation club and traveling and going to the wild. So when it was time to go to university, I made the logical decision to become a doctor. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, part of it is because in Africa, and I'm sure it's like this in many other places in the world, but if you're good at maths and you're good at science, you become a doctor. And so I thought, well, I'm good at science, I'm good at maths, and I like people, I want to change the world. I should do this by becoming a doctor. But like 1 week into pre-med, I knew it was not for me. And it took me a while to tell my parents, like not that long, just 2 years. But after 2 years, I finally got the guts to tell them, look, this is really not for me. I really appreciate your sacrifice. And I love science. I want to stay in school, but not in this department. And the only thing that I had enjoyed while I was there was ecology. So I started taking all these ecology courses, and I started getting involved in different research projects. And one of them involved lizards. So I got in touch with a professor while I was in university. And although I lived in Botswana, I was not in Montana. So he was looking for research assistants, and he didn't know anybody who was interested because all the Botswana students were sponsored by the government and got lots of money and didn't really need extra jobs. And I was one of those few students that could use the extra money. So I took this job as a research assistant, and we started working in Namibia and in other parts of Botswana studying lizards. Now, if you know me, you know that this is ridiculous because I have a legitimate phobia. I am terrified of lizards. Yeah. I can't explain it. I think they're adorable, they're cute, but I just can't touch them or be in the same room as them. Yeah. But sand dunes are fine. And so I graduated. I worked in Botswana for a little bit. I worked with wild dogs, and that was interesting as well. But I knew it wasn't where I wanted to spend the rest of my life. And so I moved back to Zambia. And when I moved back to Zambia, I did various research projects, but I got really lucky and I found this opening. This organization was going to do a research study looking at the bushmeat trade. And I didn't know much about the bushmeat trade at the time because I had grown up in Botswana, and bushmeat, while it is a problem there, it's not as significant as it is in Zambia. So we started asking a lot of questions about the bushmeat trade. And soon it became obvious to me that it was a lot bigger than anybody really understood. One of the things is posts like this, which you see, is that people were openly consuming bushmeat, which they knew was illegal, but they just didn't care. It wasn't a big factor in them deciding what kind of meat they were going to eat. Also, as much as they loved bushmeat, none of them could tell you exactly what they were eating. So they thought it might be impala or buffalo or any number of things, but none of them were certain about what kind of meat it was. We also found that, unlike in other countries where people were consuming bushmeat because they didn't have access to alternative sources of protein, in Lusaka, it was mostly middle to high income residents who were consuming bushmeat. So they weren't doing it because they didn't have money or didn't have access to beef or chicken or pork or anything else. They were doing it because they genuinely loved it. They thought it was better than other types of meat. They felt that the taste was superior. A lot of bushmeat is smoked and dried, mostly as a preservation method, but people were doing it, people like that taste. They felt that smoky taste was what made bushmeat taste good. They also felt that it was healthier than farmed animals, such as beef, cows and chickens and all of these other things. They felt like it was non-GMO. So they we really had a problem, like how we're going to tackle this. Another thing we found is because they knew it was illegal, it wasn't being sold out in the open. Yes, there were Facebook posts, but they were in groups where people knew one another and they could trust one another, and you couldn't really find the person who was selling the meat. And meat was being smuggled in sacks like this, hidden in backpacks, in luggage, hidden in bags of charcoal, because a lot of people in Lusaka still use charcoal to cook their food, to heat their water. So it was a serious problem. And from the conservation standpoint, aside from the effect it had on herbivores, we were also deeply concerned about the effect that it had on our carnivore populations. One of the biggest ways that bushmeat is harvested is through snaring. So these wire snares allow people to not have to be in the protected area all the time. They don't have to sit there and wait for the right time to, stalk the impala. They can just leave traps everywhere and come back and harvest literally whatever they find. And this is a huge problem. I know it's horrifying to look at images like this, but I also find it important for us to see exactly what's happening and to understand the effect that the bushmeat trade has. So, but in Zambia, the bushmeat trade is by far the biggest threat to our wildlife populations, far more than ivory and pangolin and the rhino trade all put together. The illegal bushmeat trade is indiscriminate. So at this point, wildlife populations are so low that poachers are killing anything they find, whether it be a carnivore, and they're just chopping it all up and smuggling it to these people in Lusaka who have no idea what they're eating, but as long as it's bushmeat, it's fine. So through the Lion Recovery Fund, we were able to get funding for this campaign. And it was very important, based on the data that we got from our surveys, to have a campaign that tackled two main things. People needed to understand that the bushmeat trade was serious because it was a joke. It was a casual thing. People, yeah, it's bushmeat, but it's not a big deal. I don't know anybody who's been arrested for being in possession of bushmeat. So it was clear that we needed strong messaging that got that message across. But it was also important for us to have an alternative. So if you're going to tell people to not eat this meat, which they've been consuming almost since they were born, this is part of their heritage, it reminds them of their grandmother's cooking or life in the village, and they now live in the city and have money, but they still want to go back to, who they used to be. And also, they want to impress their friends and their relatives because it's prestigious, it's rare, it's a delicacy. How are we going to get them to stop? Well, we need to look at legal alternatives. And legal alternatives are not just important because they provide people with access to bushmeat that hasn't been poached. It also provides jobs. So game farms have proven in Zambia and in all across the continent to be a way to provide local communities with access to wildlife, to provide actually sources of wildlife to restock a lot of our national parks, which have been completely depleted because of the bushmeat trade. So I will now share our 60-second clip, which will give you an idea of what the campaign is about.
It's illegal.
Tizipitira kwa meno.
It's dangerous.
Paone kakandu paja. So isapo maimbwa. Come in, buffalo.
Okay.
It carries diseases.
This is bushmeat. Buffalo.
Eat. Eat or eat it. Muliimbwa, muliwathoki, mulizebra. Me buffalo chapi.
Bushmeat. Your son is very sick.
Doctor, he just had some bushmeat.
Don't eat illegal bushmeat. This is not a game. Buy legal Zambian game meat.
Thank you. So right off the bat, when we thought about this campaign, we knew that it needed to be strong, it needed to be impactful, it needed to get people's attention. They couldn't ignore it, and so we went with messaging that was very strong, very aggressive, and very visceral, but also very unsettling. That was one thing that we wanted people to leave their kitchen or wherever they were watching this advert from, leave feeling unsettled about the kind of food they were feeding themselves and the kind of food they were giving their families. We knew that they weren't really interested in how this would affect the animals, and unfortunately in third world countries, conservation just is rarely on the main agenda of people. And sometimes it's understandable. They have so many other things that they feel are important. You know, poverty is right in their face. And in Zambia, we have a lot of issues. Like, people are just trying to get to work on a road with potholes. People are just trying to get medical care. People are just trying to get their families out of poverty. They're trying to get employment. And so conservation isn't something that they're thinking about. But we needed to deal with this problem, and we needed to deal with it now. So with this campaign, we wanted people to leave having watched this and have three main players in mind. We needed them to think about the poacher, the trader, and the consumer. We needed them to immediately see this advert and think, these guys, where does my meat come from? It comes from these men that go into protected areas and kill animals. A lot of people in Lusaka don't think about where this meat comes from. They have a vague idea that it comes from protected areas, but they never think it has been poached in a national park, and it's a population that is meant to be protected, and I am eating something which is meant to be conserved. There's also the perception that the government is just keeping these animals for themselves and not interested in sharing, even though there are hunting quotas and many other ways for people to benefit. The perception is that these animals aren't ours, and so even if we eat a few, it's not our problem. So we wanted people to think about it. Who is a hunter? He's hunting illegally, he knows the area well, and also he's not doing you any favors. He's doing it purely for money. And the same thing with the traders. We wanted people to think about who the traders are. Oftentimes, how the bushmeat trade works in protected areas is that a poacher will go into a national park or another area, kill animals, smoke and dry the meat, and then sell it on to a trader for a relatively low markup. And the trader will then use known smuggling routes to take this meat from, for example, Kafue National Park, which is 3 hours away from Lusaka, and go past roadblocks or use routes where they know the police won't be there, or like I mentioned, hide it in their clothing or hide it, under a van. Another thing we've seen people do is hollow out spare tires and shove meat in there. So we needed consumers to think clearly, where is this meat coming from and why are these people selling this meat to me? And then lastly, we wanted people to watch this ad and identify with the consumer. Currently, over 1,000 tons of bushmeat are being consumed in Lusaka every year. So that's an average of 2 kgs of illegal meat for every household, which doesn't sound like much, but if you think about every year since maybe independence, which was 50 years ago, how long can we how long can we go on with numbers like this? And so we needed people to look at this and think, this is me. I am that lady who goes to the back of the parking lot and buys meat from that trader. I am the one who believes everything he says, even though I don't know him. He could be selling me anything, but I trust him because I want this meat so badly. So all of those things were really important. And another thing, you'll notice that a lot of it wasn't in English, although the main messaging was we knew that although our target audience are well-educated middle-income people, messaging sinks in more when they hear their own language, when they can identify with the message. So it was really important for us to keep pushing it home that this is you, this is your friend, or this is your mother, this is your cousin, these are people you know, and this is food that you're bringing into your home and risking your life and the lives of your children.
Freshi, ilinyoni. Salamu alero. Gachini.
Yanungira ka?
Yeah. Kansima fast.
Ni buffalo.
Good.
So as disgusting as that looks, that is exactly how bushmeat is prepared. Poachers are not thinking about hygiene. They're just trying to get the meat packed and dried and shipped out as quickly as possible. And this was the biggest missing link in a lot of people's thought process. They weren't thinking at all about where their meat was coming from. And this was something that we needed to keep reiterating. Do you know, can you trust this trader? Can you trust this poacher? Can you trust this meat? You know you've gotten sick before. A lot of the people that we interviewed had admitted that they had what they called allergic reactions, but more than likely, it's just eating a dodgy piece of meat and getting sick. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the challenge was breaking those preconceived ideas that have been cemented in their minds for years and years, that bushmeat tastes better than game meat. Bushmeat is healthier. Bushmeat, is a delicacy. I need to have it. How will I impress my in-laws if I don't have bushmeat? How will, people respect me if I can't get my hands on bushmeat? How do we deal with that kind of ingrained mentality in people? And that's the hardest part about behavioral change campaigns, is that you're dealing with something that people truly believe is the way things should be. And how do you get them to do a complete 180 and change their minds?
Mama, your son is very sick. What did he eat?
Doctor, he just had some bushmeat. Siniziva, but he just said Dienzeni buffalo. Now, I'm not even sure. Please, doctor, help me. Please, doctor, nipempako, please. Ntandizenkoni sure, please. Onanvioni kila mwana kudwara. It's only you who can help him. Please, doctor, help him. I don't know what to do now.
And so in our messaging, we deliberately targeted mothers, and we deliberately targeted their soft spot, which was their children, because maybe they could get away with, eating whatever and just taking some medicine, going to the doctor, but can you justify making your child sick over a piece of dodgy meat? Not really. Another thing that was really important for people to understand the consequences. So aside from illness, people do get arrested. When you buy bushmeat, you are sending a poacher into the bush to face off with wildlife police officers. A lot of these men die, or at the very least get arrested, and that's not helping local communities like you think it is. There's also a lot of heavy fines, which people don't know. And the law in Zambia has been revised of late, and it's been really important for people to understand that whether you are a poacher or a trader or a consumer, if you're caught in possession of illegal bushmeat, you get a minimum fine of 60,000 kwacha, which is about $6,000. And I can't afford that. I doubt anybody in our target audience can afford that as well. And if you can't, you face automatic jail time. It was also important to inundate our audience with this messaging. So showing graphic images like this, that is not a real hippo head, by the way. Yeah, no hippos were harmed in the making of this. Yeah. But using social media, like I said, our target are middle income residents of Lusaka. These are people with disposable income. They have access to social media. They listen to radio on the way home, or they listen to radio on the weekends. And it was important that when they see this advert on TV, they then hop in the car to go to work the next day. They hear it. They then get on Facebook and see this messaging, and it keeps reminding them of this thing that, and it becomes like a message at the back of their head that they can't ignore. You know, messaging like that, that is graphic, hashtags that every time they see this is not a game, or they hashtag illegal bushmeat, or even hashtag Zambia, they now start to think about, what am I doing to my country? What am I doing to my family? Can I stand to risk it over a piece of meat? It's not worth it. And also using factual information. Like, this is not a mock-up. This is a real newspaper article from a few years ago where people died because of consuming illegal bushmeat. But this is the kind of stuff that doesn't usually make the news in Zambia, because we'd rather talk about politics and all sorts of other things. But getting past the noise and getting Zambians to listen to this, that this is your life. The problem with traditional conservation messaging sometimes in Zambia is people don't feel that it's really meant for them. Like I said, people have the perception that animals are owned by the government and therefore don't do anything for them, especially in cities where they're not interacting with wildlife. So when you confront them with messaging that is about them, their health, their family, they're more receptive than when you tell them to protect these animals, which they don't even get to see. And so far, we have been able to air our advert 300 times over a 3-month period. So we used digital satellite television, DSTV, and I was watching TV in the hotel, and I found a lot of the same shows. So while I'm watching Law and Order, the bushmeat campaign would come up. And also during radio programs, as I mentioned, using the radio programs which we know these people are listening to. We know what time they're tuning in for the news or tuning in for their favorite talk show, and using those opportunities to target them with this information. Using magazines as well. You know, they're in a plane flying for a work meeting, they open up and like, oh no, not this again. Oh well, I might as well read it because it's important, and I wouldn't go looking for this information, but here it is in front of me and I have no choice but to listen. You know. And also some indirect ways, making partnerships. So if you're not necessarily moved by an advert like that, you think about, you know, the number of jobs that are created by the illegal bushmeat. So a few weeks ago, we went with a TV crew to Kafue National Park, which is, as I mentioned, 3 hours away, and Zambia's biggest national park. And we talked to people from the local communities who are working in some of the safari lodges, and hearing from those people how the bushmeat trade affects them, how it affects their lives, and how without wildlife, they have no way to feed their families. And some innovative ways as well. When I get back home next week, we have Zambia's biggest food festival. So 10,000 people get together to get fat. And, yeah. And we're going to be there talking about our campaign, you know, giving out free samples of legal game meat, giving them access to legal suppliers, showing them this is where you can go for legal game meat. You don't need to wait for a dodgy man to come with his newspaper-covered mystery meat. You can go to this butchery and they will supply you with legal game meat. And if you think it doesn't taste the same as the illegal stuff you've been eating, well, here's a sample and you can see that it's actually tastier. And we're partnering with a celebrity chef. I use that term loosely because it is Zambia. Yeah. But she's a well-known chef in Zambia, and she's going to be talking about, the different ways, some of the traditional ways of cooking bushmeat, but also some exciting new recipes that get people excited. And it's a less depressing way to talk about the campaign, because if you use that kind of messaging, people can get a bit fatigued and start changing the channel because they see it and they just get disgusted, which I do too. Yeah. But aside from the campaign, we're also doing some amazing work to get women more interested in conservation. So not just the bushmeat campaign, but to get women, and especially young girls, involved in conservation efforts. So I'm going to shift gears a bit and talk more about what we as an organization do. And one of the things that we do is having these network events. So quarterly, we meet up and have inspirational women in Zambia talking about the work that they've been doing. I'm sure this is an issue across the world, but especially in Zambia, conservation is a very male-dominated field. And women, and especially young girls, are afraid to get involved in conservation because they feel they have no chance of meeting a man. They have no chance of living in the city or having access to technology. Their idea of conservation is a beaten up Land Rover in the middle of the national park, covered in mud. And that's great for some people, but unfortunately, for a lot of young girls, that is not what they were taught to aspire to be. So we work very hard to get women talking to other women, sharing ideas, connecting. A lot of women work in the same space but have never met and have never realized how they can interact. So Women for Conservation is an initiative that we started last year, and we've had 3 meetings so far. And we've been able to get women from wildlife conservation, water conservation, women who work in government, women who work in NGOs, women who are in their evening years, women who are just starting out in conservation, talking to potential conservationists. As Hefe mentioned, and I truly believe the future of conservation lies in the hands of people who live in these countries, who understand what's going on. And it's really important to get those young girls engaged and active. Aside from that, we also work really hard to educate the public, not just through our campaign, but putting up banners in airports and in other public spaces. When you go for a council meeting, when you go to sign up for a new application or something, to see this kind of message, because a lot of people don't know that wildlife crime is serious, that it has an effect on them and their lives, and that we as a nation, as Zambia, need to do something about it. We also do outreach through internships. So right there we have 2 interns who've been with us for a few months. Mina on the right was working directly, on the left was working directly with me in the awareness campaign, and she was a joy to work with. And working with young people like this is pretty encouraging. You can get bogged down sometimes. The work starts to seem routine, but when you have a bright, smiling face, asking you questions, looking at you like you have all the answers, it's a real ego boost, but it's also motivating. Yeah. And the bulk of our work, believe it or not, in spite of all of that, what we're really known for is our work in law enforcement. And we've been working with the Department of National Parks and Wildlife, who are our government partners, for several years now, primarily in breaking down criminal syndicates. So we're really interested in getting to the people who send the poachers to these protected areas. Poachers, to use Joyce's words, are a dime a dozen. You arrest one, they'll just send another or send another 10. And these people are motivated by things that you and I are motivated by as well, trying to feed their families. And often they feel like this is the only way to do it. So we're interested in the guys who are well connected, who are not doing it because they are poor, who do it because they're involved in all sorts of other illicit crimes. They're moving arms one day, they're moving humans the next day, they're transporting drugs across the border alongside these products. And so we work in specific border regions. Currently, we're supporting 22 investigations teams throughout the country, primarily in border areas such as Namibia, where there are huge elephant strongholds, as well as Zimbabwe, Malawi, recently Tanzania, and soon Congo and Angola as well. And the goal is to do more long-term investigations, to understand who is doing what, who is buying from whom, who is selling to who, where does it go, and how do we break down networks like that? How do we get inside them? And how do we deal with people who, for example, will never be found in possession of the rhino horn or the ivory because they're smarter than that? And so we have to work with anti-money laundering teams and think about more prosecution-led investigations. Think about using call records. Think about, using GPS and finding out emails and a lot of complicated stuff that I know very little about, to be honest, just because it's amazing the kind of information our team is able to find. But also, it's, like I said, about catching the bad guys, catching the middlemen, catching the guys who sell the ivory, who ship it out of Africa, catching the guys who are smuggling the live pangolins, and making sure that those pangolins make it back home. So as I mentioned, we haven't been running for a very long time. We got established in 2015, but we've been able to do a lot. Just last year alone, we were able to assist the department in arresting over 1,000 wildlife criminals. We were able to assist in confiscating more than 3,000 kilograms of ivory and more than 5,000 kilograms of bushmeat, and making sure that 70 pangolins made it back home, and over 100 cat skins, so these are lion, leopard, serval, and cheetah skins, and confiscating over 390 weapons. But it's not just enough to confiscate and to arrest. We need to make sure that these people actually go where they're supposed to go, which is prison. And so we have a team of 6 dedicated lawyers who attend every single court hearing. And if they can't be there in person, they're on the phone with the prosecutors, finding out, did he show up? Did he get bail? No, he shouldn't get bail. And let me give you a list of reasons why. Let me help you submit these to the magistrates. Let me help you come up with a rapid reference guide so that you know exactly what to do when someone is caught with ivory or with a pangolin. A lot of our prosecutors have never prosecuted wildlife crime cases before. Previously, all prosecutions were handled by the Department of National Parks and Wildlife, but now they've all been shifted to the National Prosecutions Authority. So last year we had a case where 3 Chinese men and 2 Zambians were arrested and found in possession of over 25 kg of rhino horn. And this was a significant case because we know that Asia is the biggest market for products like this. But we also know that we had never caught a single person red-handed. And so this was a massive case for us. And we had a legal assistant who was able to travel 16 times over 600 kilometers to be at every single hearing, to make sure that every single time they applied for bail, which was 3 times, that bail got rejected, to make sure that their phones were seized and that their call records were looked at. And we've been able to get some significant results. For example, in this case, all 5 men were sentenced to 5 years and are currently serving it in Zambia. But that's not enough. This is just the beginning. We also have a detection dog unit. So currently we have 4 amazing dogs and 4 amazing dog handlers. Each handler has a unique relationship with each dog. And these dogs work all across Zambia, particularly in Lusaka at the international airport, but also in different roadblocks, sniffing out things like bushmeat. A couple of weeks ago, they found several tons of bushmeat hidden in someone's truck. But besides that, they're also able to detect rhino horn and ivory and pangolin scales and firearms. It's also really important for us to understand why things are happening the way they are. So not just collecting law enforcement data, but also doing research. Currently, we're doing a study to understand the cat skin trade, to understand why all of a sudden we're seeing a lot of leopard and lion and cheetah skins being confiscated. Where are they going? Where are they coming from? Using DNA evidence, DNA sequencing, trying to understand which populations are most at risk, and that will inform how many or how much money or how much time or how many resources we put into protecting certain populations. So that's a lot. It's a bit overwhelming, but what can you do to be part of this? Well, firstly, like our page, visit us on Facebook, not just for the sake of it, but it's really important that people, not just in Zambia, but in the world, start to understand the value of this work, start to understand how much time and effort goes into doing this kind of work. And we can always use the support, but also donating. Just for the bushmeat study and the bushmeat campaign alone, just for 3 months of promoting that advert, and I'll be the first to say 3 months is nowhere near enough time to change people's behavior. But just for 3 months of airing, we needed $6,000. The same with radio, and just to have billboards all over Lusaka, we needed $1,500. And this is something that we hope to keep doing, but we can only do through your support. So I'd like to thank you so much for giving me your attention, for not dozing off. I know he was really shaky in the middle there, but thank you for thank you for sticking with me.